It was one of those slow, peaceful afternoons where sunlight streamed in through the windows, creating golden patterns on the floor. My dad had left for work, leaving just me and my stepmom Teresa, alone in the house. This wasn't unusual, and I never paid much attention to it. But today felt different. There was something in the air that I couldn't quite place. I sensed it the moment I stepped into the living room and saw her sitting on the couch. She was absorbed in a book, her long brown hair gently cascading over her shoulders. She wore a light, flowing summer dress, simple yet flattering, and the way it clung to her figure made it hard not to notice her beauty. Teresa was younger than people usually imagined a stepmother to be, only in her late 30s, and that always created a strange dynamic between us. She was closer to my age than to my dad's, and while I tried to maintain respect, I couldn't help but see her in ways I knew I shouldn't. When I entered the room, she glanced up, her eyes locking with mine for a moment, and there was something in that look that made my heart skip a beat. I quickly looked away, trying to dismiss the feeling she was my stepmom, after all, and any thoughts I had needed to be pushed aside. "Hey, Tom," she greeted me warmly, closing her book and sitting up straighter on the couch. "How's your day going?" I shrugged, feeling a bit awkward. "It's fine, just hanging around," she chuckled softly, a sound that made the tightness in my chest grow stronger. "You seem restless. Why don't you come sit with me for a bit? We can talk." I hesitated. Sitting alone with her felt like walking into uncertain territory, but I couldn't refuse without it seeming odd. So I walked over and sat down beside her, careful to leave a bit of space between us. The air felt heavy, as if there was something unspoken lingering between us, and I wasn't sure how to navigate it. "So, what's been on your mind lately?" she asked, turning slightly to face me. As she moved, her dress shifted, revealing a little more of her legs, and I struggled to keep my gaze focused. "You seemed a bit distant." I swallowed hard, trying to focus on her words rather than the way her lips moved. "Nothing much, just life, I guess." She smiled again, but this time it felt different. There was a softness in her expression that made my pulse race. "You can talk to me, you know. I realize we haven't known each other for very long, but I want to be here for you. You don't have to carry everything on your own." Her voice was sincere, but there was something else beneath the surface, something that made my skin tingle. I could feel her warmth beside me, and it took all my willpower to keep my hands from reaching out. "It's just complicated," I said, my voice quieter now. I wasn't even sure what I was talking about anymore. My mind was spinning with thoughts I knew I shouldn't have, and the room felt too close, too intimate. She leaned in a little closer, her eyes searching mine. "Complicated how?" she asked softly, her voice gentle. I could feel the tension building between us, like we were slowly approaching an invisible line, neither of us brave enough to cross it, or perhaps we were, but too scared of what might happen if we did. "I don't know," I muttered, looking away, trying to keep control of the situation. "Everything's just felt different since you came into the picture." There was a brief silence, and when I glanced back at her, I saw something flicker in her eyes, something that made my heart pound even faster. "Different how?" she asked, her voice now a barely audible whisper. I hesitated, my mind racing with 1,000 conflicting thoughts. Should I tell her? Should I admit how I'd been feeling? Before I could stop myself, the words spilled out. "Since you married Dad, things have been confusing for me." Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she seemed to lean in closer, her body now just inches from mine. "Confusing in what way?" she asked, her voice filled with curiosity. Panic surged through me. This was dangerous territory, but I was already in too deep to retreat. "I've just started noticing things, feeling things I shouldn't," I confessed. She didn't respond at first, simply watching me with an unreadable expression. The silence stretched on, thick and tense, until she finally spoke. "What kind of things?" she asked, her voice soft, almost teasing. I swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the couch to ground myself. "Feelings. About you," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. I braced myself, half expecting her to pull away, angry or repulsed. But instead, she remained still, her gaze softening as she studied me. "Tom," she said slowly, her hand reaching out to touch mine. The contact sent a jolt through me and I froze, unsure of what was happening. "It's okay to feel confused. Things like this, they happen." Her calmness caught me off guard. I hadn't expected her to be so understanding. "You're not upset?" I asked, still trying to wrap my head around the situation. She smiled gently, her fingers lightly brushing against mine. "No, I'm not upset. I understand. Things have been strange for both of us trying to figure out this new family dynamic. Her touch was soft, comforting, but it was also something more. There was an unspoken tension now, one that had been simmering beneath the surface for months, and it was growing stronger with each passing moment. I've noticed things too, she admitted, her voice barely louder than a breath, and maybe we don't have to ignore them. My heart skipped a beat, and I looked at her, unsure if I'd heard her right. What do you mean, she asked, leaning in a little closer, her face now just inches away from mine. I mean, maybe it's all right to explore these feelings. Maybe we don't have to act like they aren't there. It was becoming hard to breathe. The room felt as if it was shrinking around us, and the tension between us was almost unbearable. Are you sure? I asked, my voice shaking. She gave me another smile, but this time her eyes held something I hadn't seen before: desire. I wouldn't have said anything if I wasn't. My pulse quickened as her hand left mine and gently rested on my arm, sending waves of warmth through me. I could hardly think clearly, my mind clouded by emotions I had avoided acknowledging until now. Cautiously, I reached out, my hand lightly settling on her shoulder. She didn't pull away. Instead, she leaned into my touch, her eyes locked on mine. Tom, she whispered, her voice soft but intense. It's okay. That was all the encouragement I needed. Without thinking, I leaned in, brushing my lips against hers. At first, it was soft, tentative, as though we were testing the waters. But when she didn't pull back, I found the courage to deepen the kiss, losing myself in the moment. Her hands moved up to my chest, firm but gentle, and the tension between us began to dissolve, replaced by something warmer, more intense. The kiss grew more passionate, our bodies pressing together as months of unspoken feelings rose to the surface. I pulled her closer, my fingers running through her hair as we continued, lost in the heat of the moment. Every touch, every movement felt like it was igniting a flame inside me, one I had kept buried for too long. When we finally pulled apart, both of us breathless, she smiled at me, a smile that sent shivers down my spine. Now do you see, she whispered, her voice filled with warmth and excitement. It doesn't have to be confusing anymore. I nodded, still struggling to catch my breath, my mind spinning from what had just unfolded. From that point on, I knew nothing between us would ever be the same. We sat there, still close, the air thick with the weight of what had just happened. My heart raced so fast I thought it might burst from my chest. I couldn't believe what had just transpired, yet I knew there was no turning back. The tension that had built up for months, maybe even longer, had finally shattered, and now we were left on the other side, unsure of what came next. Teresa leaned back slightly, her fingers still drawing soft circles on my arm. Her eyes were filled with something deeper now, something more intense. I could see the desire in her gaze, but there was also something softer, almost affection. It was as if the kiss had unlocked more than just a physical connection. It had opened a door to something we had both been avoiding. Tom, she whispered, her voice barely audible but full of emotion. I felt this way for a long time. I just didn't know if you felt it too. Her words hit me like a wave, crashing over me and pulling me under. I hadn't expected her to be so open, so vulnerable, and it only made the moment feel more real. I swallowed hard, trying to find my voice, but everything I had been holding back for so long came rushing to the surface. I didn't know what to do. I didn't think it was possible for us, I stammered, my voice shaky. She gently placed her fingers on my lips, cutting me off. You don't have to explain, she said softly. I know, I felt it too. But now that it's out there, we can't ignore it anymore. Her words carried a finality, but also a promise, an unspoken understanding that this wasn't just a fleeting moment. It wasn't something we could pretend never happened. The connection between us was undeniable, and now that we had crossed the line, there was no going back. I looked into her eyes, feeling the weight of everything that had just happened and everything that was still to come. What do we do now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She smiled gently, cupping my cheek with her hand. We don't have to figure it all out right now, she said. But we can take it slow. We can figure it out together. Her words soothed the storm of emotions swirling inside me. I leaned into her touch, closing my eyes for a moment as I tried to steady myself. Everything about this felt so intense, so overwhelming, but also right. When I opened my eyes, I found her watching me with a mixture of warmth and desire, her gaze fixed on mine, as if she could read every thought running through my mind. Slowly, I reached out and took her hand in mine, my thumb gently brushing over her knuckles. I want this, I said softly, my voice steadier now. I don't know what it means or where it's going, but I want this. I want you. She inhaled sharply at my words, and for a moment I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. But then she smiled, and it was like sunlight breaking through the clouds. She leaned in closer, her lips barely brushing mine as she whispered, "Then take me, Tom." Without another word, I pulled her toward me, our lips meeting in a kiss that was deeper, more intense than before. It was as if all the emotions we had been holding back were pouring out now with every touch, every movement. Her fingers tangled in my hair as she pressed herself against me, the heat between us becoming unbearable. I could feel the urgency in her kiss, the need for more. I wrapped my arms around her, pulling her onto my lap as the kiss deepened, her body fitting perfectly against mine. The soft fabric of her dress brushed against my skin, and the warmth of her beneath it drove me wild. Her hands roamed over my chest, her touch firm yet gentle, as I began to remove the soft material of her dress. She pulled back slightly, her breathing coming in short, ragged gasps as she gazed at me with eyes darkened by desire. "I've wanted this for so long," she whispered, her voice shaking with the weight of her confession. I tried to resist it, but I can't anymore. "I need you," her words sent a rush of heat through me, and I couldn't hold back any longer. My hands slid down to her waist, removing everything she wore as I pulled her closer, kissing her again, this time harder, my lips devouring hers as the intensity between us grew. My hands explored her body, and she responded with equal passion. She touched me, making me even harder, fueling my desire. The world around us seemed to disappear, leaving only the two of us, completely lost in the heat of our connection. She began to undress me, and soon we were fully entwined, her body moving rhythmically on top of me, taking the lead. Every motion, every touch, and every kiss was filled with raw, undeniable need, something far beyond anything I had experienced before. There was no hesitation, no doubt, just the two of us, finally surrendering to the feelings we had kept hidden for so long. Her breath was hot against my skin as she explored every inch of me, as if she were memorizing my body. I leaned back, giving her full access, my hands gripping her hips as she moved on me, driving me to the edge. "Teresa," I groaned, my voice thick with desire. "I can't, I need," she silenced me with a kiss, her lips soft yet demanding as she gently pushed me back onto the couch, her body hovering over mine. "I know," she whispered, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "I need it too," and with that, we gave in completely. We moved together, our connection intensifying, as if time itself blurred, until I reached my climax inside her. When it was over, we lay tangled together, our bodies spent, the air around us heavy with the scent of sweat and desire. I could feel her heart beating against mine as our breathing slowly synchronized, both of us coming down from the high of what had just transpired. Teresa shifted slightly, resting her head on my chest as she looked up at me, a soft smile playing on her lips. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. I nodded, still trying to catch my breath, my mind reeling from what had just unfolded. "Yeah," I replied, my voice hoarse. "More than okay," she smiled again, her fingers tracing light patterns on my chest as she relaxed against me. "Good," she whispered, her eyes fluttering shut as she sighed contentedly. "Because it's just the beginning." As I held her close, feeling the warmth of her body against mine, I knew she was right. This was only the start, and whatever happened next, we would face it together. But as we lay there, the reality of what had just happened slowly began to settle in. The intensity of the moment had taken over, sweeping us both up in a wave of passion and desire we couldn't resist. But now, in the quiet aftermath, reality began to creep back in. Teresa shifted beside me, her hand still resting on my chest, but her expression had changed. There was a contemplative look in her eyes, a realization of the line we had crossed. She sat up slowly, brushing her hair back from her face, and for a moment the silence between us was deafening. "Tom," she began, her voice soft but serious. "What we just did, it changes everything." I sat up too, the warmth of the moment fading as the weight of her words sunk in. She was right, what had happened between us couldn't simply be brushed aside. The unspoken tension we had danced around for so long was now out in the open, and we had crossed into dangerous territory that would complicate everything. "I know," I said quietly, my voice tinged with uncertainty, "but I don't regret it." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of emotions, desire, fear, and something else I couldn't quite place. "I don't regret it either," she whispered, "but we have to be realistic about what this means. The reality of the situation hit me hard. She was my stepmom, married to my dad, and the complications that would arise from this were more than I had allowed myself to consider in the heat of the moment. My heart ached at the thought of losing her, of losing this connection we had discovered. But I knew we couldn't just pretend it didn't matter. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice thick with emotion. "We can't just go back to how things were." Teresa sighed, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the edge of the couch as she wrestled with her own thoughts. "We have to be careful, Tom," she said softly. "This is bigger than just the two of us. We have to think about your father, about what this could do to our family." Her words stung, but I knew she was right. As much as I wanted to hold on to the intensity of what had just happened between us, the consequences loomed over us like a dark cloud. We couldn't act on our feelings without thinking of the people we would hurt along the way. "I don't want to lose you," I admitted, my voice cracking slightly. "But I don't know how to make this work without destroying everything." She reached out, gently cupping my face in her hand as she looked at me with sad but understanding eyes. "You're not going to lose me," she said softly. "But we have to be smart about this. We can't let our emotions ruin the people we care about." The truth of her words weighed heavily on us both. There was no easy way out, no simple solution to the mess we had created, but as I gazed into her eyes, I knew that whatever came next, we had to face it together. "We'll figure it out," she whispered, her thumb gently brushing my cheek. "We'll take it one step at a time." And in that moment, as I held her close, I realized that even though the road ahead was uncertain, I wouldn't trade this feeling for anything.